Today's Legal on 4, what are your legal rights and obligations if you rent out your home? As more and more people hang on to their property because of a tough real estate market, a lot of them are opting to rent it out. Well, legal contributor Craig Wisnam joins us now with part 2 of this discussion. Last week we talked about setting up an LLC, a limited liability company for the real estate that you own to offer you some protection from liability. Today, your legal rights and obligations as a landlord, and then next time we'll talk about your rights and obligations as a renter. So let's talk about landlords. What is a landlord's main responsibility?
Well, one of the first things they need to start with is the lease. Normally they're the ones that prepare that and provide that. And of course the lease is the contract explaining all the details of the rental arrangement. And believe it or not, this can be in fairly plain English, but it has to answer all the questions that come up in the process of renting. You know, not only how much is paid, when is it due, how long is this lease for, are pets allowed, who pays the utilities, what's the security deposit. It answers all the questions that might come up in the course of the lease.
And basically the lease can have anything in it.
Well, it can you want it to be very specific and spell things out, but there are certain limitations, and a landlord has to be aware of these, because if he puts them in the lease and they're not allowed, they might be void, or there might otherwise be penalties and such. Well, there's the real source of this is the Arizona Residential Landlord and Tenant Act, and that's our state laws that say what you can do as a landlord to a tenant. Now, the Secretary of State has to provide this to any tenant who requests it, but anybody can go on the website, which is azsos.gov, and look at a copy of the Landlord Tenant Act.
And there's also federal restrictions.
There's also federal restriction. Those normally involve anti-discrimination prohibitions that you have to be aware of, but hopefully those aren't things that people are going to be violating. But the Landlord Tenant Act has very specific rules, like a security deposit can only be 1.5 times the monthly rent. You can't lock a tenant out of their property without a court order. There are very specific procedures you have to go through even if someone doesn't pay the rent. When a lease ends, and this is always a big one, you have to give them their security deposit back within 14 days, and or show them any deductions you've made for that security deposit, telling them why you did it, what had to be cleaned or fixed or deducted.
And I suspect that a lot of people, 14 days is not a long period of time. So I suspect a lot of people violate that, but the thought of taking somebody to court over that, over a $250 deposit.
And there's triple damages, though, if you don't follow the rules as a landlord in terms of what you're supposed to pay back the tenant. So again, you have to be very careful with it. These rules aren't too hard to comply with if you know them. But you got to go on there, look at the Landlord Tenant Act, look at the lease you're providing to a tenant, make sure it says what you want, make sure it follows the law. And it's hard enough being a landlord when you get calls in the middle of the night about the heat going out or things like that.
What was that website again? People can find out more from
azsos.gov, and that's the Arizona Secretary of State.
azsos.gov.
Yeah, it's the Secretary of State. The federal laws can be found on HUD.gov. Exactly.
HUD.gov.
And so that's the starting point if you're a landlord. And good luck, you may need it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about the renter's rights next time.
Exactly.
Okay, sounds good. The online